Hey Student Success, welcome to week 11, which runs from April 4th through the 10th. Before I hop in, here is your weekly reminder that your student services assignment is due the end of week 16. Again, when you submit this, I don't need your registration, so you do not have to tell me which one you plan on attending. Rather, you submit the certificate of completion after you've already attended that workshop. So just keep that in mind. And again, you have until the end of our last week together, but we are, by the time you watch this video, in April. So we are closely getting to the end of that semester point. So just make sure that you are registering for that workshop and submitting that certificate of completion. All right, so I'm going to scroll on down. Again, I've got quite a bit to go here. Week 11. This is based on Chapter 6. You'll see that there are two assignments this week. You have your Chapter 6 discussion, so you do have a discussion post back this week. You have to post your original response by Wednesday for week 11 attendance and respond to two classmates by Sunday. And then you have a how well do you study assignment. So two assignments, but one you do have for actual attendance points. So when you click into the materials folder, you'll have a couple of things. We'll talk about this one as it relates to your assignment here in just a few minutes. But you have your link to your textbook, and then you have Chapter 6 slides. So I'll show you the Chapter 6 slides is like this booklet, and it goes into some more detail about like testing situations. As you can see, like Chapter 6 is called Preparing for and Taking Tests. So if you want to go through and look at this in detail, you can. In terms of the lecture, I'm going to just use the chapter to go through and talk about the concepts. All right, so Chapter 6, Preparing for and Taking Tests. As always, there's a little beginning saying, where are you? Kind of assess how you feel about this particular concept. What are your goals as it relates to test taking? Are you looking to reduce some test anxiety? Are you looking to study with other people? What are you hoping to do? All right, so Chapter 6, we are tested a lot. Obviously, as a college student, you're tested frequently with literal tests, but then also in the workplace, you are constantly being evaluated. For instance, I was just evaluated by my department chair last week. She has to come in, and every once a year, our department chairs have to come in and observe us and evaluate us and then talk to us. So while it's not like a paper pencil test, there is a form of evaluation. And so we are always being evaluated, whether we're students or professionals in the field. And it is just trying to measure our progress and trying to allow us more opportunities to grow in whatever capacity we are being assessed in. So sometimes thinking of assessments in that way, if you can look at them as opportunities to show what you know or opportunities to see your growth, you can kind of start thinking of them in a different way, and they might not seem as scary because sometimes people feel very anxious about testing situations. So you'll see that this learning cycle comes back in. If you remember this from earlier in the semester, talking about the learning cycle, this applies to the study cycle as well, because you have to obviously be prepared while you're in the classroom. You're taking in new ideas, you're working with those ideas and remembering them, and then you're reviewing and applying them. So all of those are part of the test taking cycle. Okay, so the next section talks about test anxiety. A little test anxiety is okay because that kind of tells you that it's important for you, right? When you have anxiety or a little bit of stress, it lets you know that something matters. Now, when it gets a little too overwhelming, that's when it becomes a problem. Or if you've ever had that situation where you feel like your mind just kind of goes blank, your critical thinking skills and things like that kind of just go out the window, because sometimes we view a test as an enemy. I know it sounds strange, but we sometimes view it as an enemy or a threat. And so therefore we go into like fight or flight mode. And that's when that like going blank sensation happens, because our brain is kicking into like, this is a threat, I need to neutralize it gear, versus this is something I need to critically think on. So we have to try to learn how to control some of that test anxiety. So there's a little bit of like testing your test anxiety, true, false, to see where you are. And this is going to talk about what test anxiety is and how do we help eliminate or at least alleviate a little bit of it. The first thing is being prepared. If you don't go to class and you don't study, then obviously you're going to have some test anxiety because you're not doing the things you need to do. So that's the first thing, is do what you have to do. You go to class, read your text, read your notes, whatever it is, ask questions, review. All of those things are going to help you be a prepared student. Challenge your negative thoughts. I know sometimes it's really easy to be like, oh, I'm really bad at, fill in the blank. I'm really bad at math. I'm really bad at English. But challenge those thoughts. I might not be great at math, but if I study, I can do okay. So try to really get rid of those bad vibes. Picture success. Really try to be like, you know what? It would be great to get that A or that B or that C. Sometimes, different grades for different people, different subjects. So visualize that. Really talk into that, put positive out. Really do not compare yourself to others. I often have students do this in my face-to-face classes where they're taking a test and they see someone turn in their quiz before them and it panics them a little bit, but you have no idea if that student knew their stuff or they just kind of flubbed their way through it and turned it in. So you don't want to compare yourself to other people. Have a plan. So when you're studying, you want to make sure, and this comes into like being prepared, you should know, is this going to be multiple choice? Is this fill in the blank? Is it essay? And then prepare for it accordingly and follow that plan. And then there are, the ones that I think you hear all the time, make sure you sleep and eat well beforehand and just relax. Progressive muscle relaxation is a way to, and there's like 20-minute versions of this and there's 2-minute versions of this. It's like taking and really stressing some muscles in your body and releasing them to kind of get that tension out a little bit. So just try to relax or maybe take a little walk around the hall before you get into your classroom. Just kind of get some of those endorphins out, if you will. Okay. Here are some like little exercise if you still really struggle with like that negative self-talk or some of the test anxiety. This next section talks about studying to learn. So I also see sometimes students who are so obsessed with, and I can say that because I was a student like that. I thought I had to get all A's all the time. And I would do that just to get the A and not necessarily to be like, oh, I learned something, and I like to think that as I progressed in my education, my outlook did change because I realized, while grades can be important, they're not the end all be all of your learning. And so when you study, you want to study to learn, not just to take and pass a test. So you really want to put into practice all these other things that we've been talking about, your note taking, your memory, your looking and seeing what kind of writing or reading or anything like that that's going to get play into your studying process. So some things you can do to make sure that you are studying not just to get a grade is to study a little bit every day. Make sure that, if you have test chapter 3 next week, start studying tonight, 5-10 minutes. Start laying that foundation so that you're not cramming at the last minute. So get your materials ready, make connections. Why are you learning this material? How does it connect to the class? How does it connect to your major? How does it connect to your personal life? Really find a method that's going to kind of help cement that knowledge. We talked about this previously, like maybe you're using flashcards or Cornell notes or whatever it might be to really make sure that you are getting that knowledge in there. You want to study before the exam. This goes over kind of just making sure that you are preparing ahead of time. These are other study success tips. Keep a study time schedule. I know I talked about this in previous weeks, but sometimes we get our work schedule, get our class schedule, but then we forget to build like study time into our schedule. So we need to have that study time set aside. We need to be mentally and physically ready to study. We want to make sure we have distractions as much as possible turned off, if you will, if that is a device, or we're finding a time and place where there's no one in our home, whatever it might be, and give yourself breaks. Chapter does also talk about studying in groups. I'm a big believer in sociocultural learning, meaning that I do feel like we learn really well from other people. Sometimes people have different perspectives that when they can share it, all of a sudden you're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Sometimes even a peer can explain something to you even better than your teacher could because they can relate to you maybe on different levels. So this section talks about, the benefits of working with other people and how to set yourself up for success if you are in a study group, making sure that you have complementary styles and meet on a regular basis, have goals for your study sessions, and check in with those goals. All right. This next section talks about actually taking tests, so knowing different types of tests. You have formative and summative assessments. Formative are those like smaller ones where you are like, it's a quiz or a pop quiz or review from something. Summative are those bigger ones like midterms and finals, where it's kind of building off of all these other previous ones. So it's helpful to know, obviously, like how much of a content is going to be covered on a test. And then, of course, you have different modalities of testing. You have in-class tests, where it's you and the paper pencil type testing. You have open book tests, which I often tell my face-to-face students, just because it's open book or open note does not mean it's easy, because you don't want to spend your whole time flipping through your pages. You want to still be familiar with the material and just use your notes or your book for that extra assistance. You have take-home tests. I also tell my students, whenever I give take-home tests or quizzes, I tend to grade them more harshly because you have more time. You should be putting more detail and attention and explanations into it. And so I am going to grade it a little bit more with scrutiny because you had that extra time and access to resources. And then you have online testing as well, which you don't want to wait until, an hour before the test closes with an online test, because what if you run into technology problems or anything like that? So you want to pay attention to this online test. You might also have electronic tests in the classroom, depending on if you're in the math emporiums, for instance. Those are right there in the classroom on a computer. And then sometimes you have alternate to like traditional testing, where you have a presentation or a speech or something where you're being assessed. Here are some other general test taking tips. This goes back to like being prepared. Know about it. What type of test is it? Is it fill in the blank? Are you allowed to use your notes? What units are being included? Try to anticipate the types of questions being asked. That can go back to like, did you take Cornell notes? Did you kind of set up a study guide? Can you allow yourself to use that to help you study? Cramming might sound like a good idea, and for some students they say it works, and it might in the short term. So if you cram and you study the night before and the next day you take a test and you pass it, it seems like it worked. However, in 2 weeks when you have like the unit test, your brain was so taxed and stressed by that cramming, it was able to remember the information in the short term, not in the long term, and you have to kind of like go back and relearn that information. So cramming is not a good long-term strategy. Get to the test site early, get to your classroom early if you're able to have a plan and follow through. Write down anything as like when you get your test, if you need to kind of jot down a few things to like, oh, I need to make sure I remember this. Read the directions carefully. This is something my face-to-face students I'm constantly telling them, like, read very carefully. And I still have students where I'll say, hey, there are 2 parts to this question, and they totally forget to answer both parts of the question. Do the easy questions first so that they're out of the way, you build a little confidence, and then you can spend more time on the tougher questions. Track your time and check your work. Also, I would not go back and change your answer unless you absolutely know that you got it wrong the first time. Sometimes students change their answers, and more often than not, they change a correct answer to a wrong answer, than vice versa. If you are curious in different types of testing for certain content areas, these are strategies for math and science, so I encourage you to take a look at those if that is beneficial to you, either now or if you have a math or science class coming up in a future semester. Here's a little bit more about different types of questions on testing. You have multiple choice questions, so this goes through like some tips on how to do there. Read each question carefully, come up with the answer in your head before looking at the options. Look to see if any of the options use words like never, always. Look for those types of, I don't want to say trick questions, but look out for, not or never or all but. Look for those questions and really make sure you go through a process of elimination. Here's some tips on true, false. Very similar tips for multiple choice there. Matching, I don't know that you'll have a lot of matching at the collegiate level, but there's some tips on matching. Short answer questions and essay questions are very similar preparation-wise. Practice your essays, practice, either if you know what the questions are ahead of time or anticipate what they are, practice it at home. Practice writing it, planning it, outlining it, making sure that you address all parts of the question. You go back and you proof it. You go back and you make sure that you have completed all the details. So it's very similar to what you would do with an actual paper, just in a shortened format and a shortened time frame. Here are some other things to think about with an essay question. If there's certain words that the author uses, the test maker, the teacher, if they say to compare and contrast, what do they mean? If they say to discuss, what do they mean? So this is kind of a helpful table for those kind of verbiage. This next section here, as we get toward the end of chapter 6, the honest truth, this is dealing with academic integrity. And this is actually going to be the basis for your, let me get there. This is going to be the basis for your chapter 6 discussion. So just kind of keep this in mind, section 6.5. So obviously we want to be academically honest. When you're dishonest, you don't learn as much. You do risk some pretty severe consequences. It can actually cause you more stress because you're worried if you're going to get caught. It's a waste of time, and you can really lower your own self-esteem with all those things. Technology has made it easier for us to, as a society, to cheat, so we have to be aware of that. Here are some examples of academic dishonesty, and again, this is going to be part of your discussion forum. So cheating, this is, I think, a lot of things that you think of when you hear cheating. Putting work, submitting work that's not your own with your name on it, looking off of someone else's paper and copying their answers, using cheat sheets or anything you're not supposed to be using for an assessment. Plagiarism is submitting material that is not entirely your own work without giving credit. So if you basically, like copy and paste, you're plagiarizing from someone else's source. If you get an idea from someone, but you don't give them credit, you're plagiarizing. You can also self-plagiarize. So if you took a class in the fall, and now you're taking a class this semester, and there's an assignment that you're like, man, this paper I wrote in the fall sounds like it could really fit for this class now. And you just kind of swap out the name and the date and turn it in. You have just committed plagiarism. You cannot do that. You would have to talk to your instructor for your current semester and say, hey, I wrote this paper in the fall. Here's how I think it could work. What can I do? And sometimes they'll be like, nope, can't do it. You have to write a whole new paper. And sometimes they'll be like, all right, let's go ahead and see what we can do and work with and how you can edit and change it to make it more fitting for this class. But it's always worth that conversation. Fabrication is just falsifying any information. This is sometimes if you have like data that you're collecting for research. Obtaining an unfair advantage. This is if maybe you got a copy of a test ahead of time. Or more likely, if you're taking a class on Monday, Wednesday, and your friend is taking the class on Tuesday, Thursday, same professor, same class, you take the test on Monday and you tell your friend on Tuesday, hey, really study this section because this test has all of these questions on it. You just were academically dishonest because you gave someone else an unfair advantage. So, and I would venture to say a lot of people do this and not even realize that that's what they're doing. So that kind of goes into like aiding and abetting academic dishonesty. And some of these things you may not come across, like falsifying. This is pretty serious, falsifying official documents and then gaining access to things you're not supposed to have access to. And then finally, the last little bit of the chapter talks about, okay, after you're done testing, you're not done. You should still look at your test, whether you did well or you did poorly, and look to see what could I have done better, or why did I do so well, and how can I continue doing this well? What kind of errors did I make, and how can I correct that moving forward? So it's really important to take a look at your assessments to make sure you're not making the same mistakes, or that you continue doing what you're doing to do well. All right, and then again, like I said, this has a little bit more detail for some of those things. All right, let's talk about your assignments. So for this week, you are completing a discussion forum. Your original response due Wednesday for week 11 attendance says two things. You have to answer these two questions. What forms of academic dishonesty are most prevalent on your campus? So remember, if you need to, go back to 6.5. Here is a list of examples of academic dishonesty. What is most prevalent? Now, let's say you are only an online student, so you're not sure. You can still talk about that. You can still say, well, based on this, I think that cheating is most prevalent. Or maybe you don't have experience. This is your first semester. You can say something like, well, in high school, this was most prevalent. So what do you see most often, either in your previous academic experiences or currently? And then what can you personally do to avoid being academically dishonest? Again, so maybe take a look at this list here in 6.5 and see what can you do to avoid being tempted to do any of these things. Can you be more prepared? Can you do your own work? Those kind of things. So post your original response answering those two questions by Wednesday for week 11 attendance, and respond to two classmates by Sunday. The last thing you're doing this week is called How Well Do You Study? It is a automatically graded assignment. So again, Blackboard will do this for me. So you want to make sure when you open it, it's going to pop up. It's going to be one of these moving, talking slideshow again.
Good study skills.
You're going to make sure you click next all the way through. Make sure you answer all the questions. And at the very last one, make sure it runs all the way to the end and you hit submit. And then, give it a couple minutes. Blackboard should then copy over the grade. Make sure it doesn't have that blue in progress circle in the grade book. All right, so as a recap for this week, please make sure you look at your Chapter 6 materials. Post your original response in the Chapter 6 discussion by Wednesday, 2 classmates by Sunday, and your How Well Do You Study kind of survey by Sunday as well. Hope you have a great week. Bye.